morning started just like any other in the quiet neighborhood. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and children's laughter could be faintly heard from a nearby park. Marcus, a hard-working IT specialist, had finally gotten a free day off after a busy week at work. Instead of spending it just resting, he decided to take care of something that had been bothering him for weeks: his Wi-Fi connection. It had been slow, cutting in and out during important online meetings, and he knew exactly how to fix it. Marcus enjoyed solving technical problems. For him, fixing his own Wi-Fi wasn't just about internet speed. It was also something he found relaxing. He loved challenges, and working with cables, routers, and settings gave him a sense of control. That morning he brewed himself a cup of coffee, grabbed his laptop, and carried his tools out onto his front porch. He thought the porch would be the best spot: fresh air, good light, and enough space to lay everything out neatly. With his laptop open and a box of wires at his feet, Marcus got to work. He carefully unscrewed the back of his old router, checked the circuits, and connected a new piece of hardware he had ordered online. It wasn't anything illegal or suspicious. It was just routine for someone who worked in technology. Every few minutes he typed commands into his laptop, checking the signal strength, adjusting antennas, and making sure everything worked smoothly. He was completely focused, almost lost in his own little world, unaware that someone nearby was already watching him with suspicion. To Marcus, nothing about his actions seemed unusual. He had done this dozens of times for friends, family, and even neighbors who needed help setting up internet connections. He wore casual clothes, a t-shirt and jeans, and his expression was calm and serious as he worked. If anyone had simply asked him what he was doing, he would have happily explained and maybe even offered to help them with their own Wi-Fi issues. But instead of seeing a man fixing his internet, someone else saw something very different. Karen, a neighbor who often peeked out of her window at people passing by, noticed Marcus sitting outside with wires and equipment. She had lived in the neighborhood for years and was known for being overly cautious, sometimes even nosy. When she spotted Marcus moving cables around and staring at his laptop, her mind immediately went to the worst possible conclusion. She didn't see a homeowner fixing his internet. She saw what she thought was a stranger trying to hack into systems or steal something. Marcus, meanwhile, kept sipping his coffee and working with patience. At one point, he leaned back, stretched his arms, and smiled to himself as he saw the Wi-Fi bars on his laptop climb higher. That little victory made him proud. It meant his work was paying off. He felt a sense of accomplishment, unaware that someone across the street was nervously clutching her phone, ready to call the police on him. The neighborhood was peaceful that morning. A few people walked their dogs, waving politely as they passed Marcus's house. Some kids rode their bikes down the street, laughing as they raced each other. To everyone else, Marcus looked like a man handling normal weekend chores. But Karen's suspicious eyes turned something ordinary into something threatening in her imagination. As Marcus continued, he thought about how much easier his online work would be once the Wi-Fi was stronger. He had big projects coming up, and he wanted everything in his home office to be perfect. For him, this wasn't just about speed, it was about being prepared, being professional, and making sure no one at work ever thought he wasn't reliable. That motivation kept him smiling, even when the router gave him trouble for a few minutes. He hummed softly to himself, enjoying the quiet day. His coffee mug sat beside him, half empty, and his laptop screen glowed with rows of codes and numbers only someone like him could understand. To Marcus, it was all routine, nothing worth attention. But fate had other plans. What should have been just another ordinary morning was about to turn into something extraordinary, all because of one phone call fueled by assumptions and fear. Marcus had no idea that his calm Saturday project was being twisted into a suspicious activity in someone else's mind. For him, it was a normal day. For Karen, it was a reason to panic. The stage was set for a misunderstanding that would soon spiral out of control, turning an innocent man's quiet morning into a story that the whole neighborhood, and later the internet, would talk about for a long time to come. Karen sat inside her living room, sipping her second cup of coffee while flipping through channels on the television. Her morning was quiet, almost too quiet, and that was exactly how she liked it. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for over 10 years, and during that time she had developed a reputation. Some neighbors politely described her as watchful, while others whispered that she was nosy and always looking for trouble. She preferred to call herself careful. In her mind, being alert to everything happening on the street was her duty. Her window gave her the perfect view of the road, the front yards, and especially Marcus's porch across the way. She often sat there like a guard on patrol, watching cars come and go, noting who visited whom, and deciding whether or not things seemed normal. That morning, when her eyes landed on Marcus, her mood shifted. She saw him sitting with wires spread out, a laptop on his lap, and a serious look on his face. To most people, this might have looked like an ordinary man fixing his internet. But Karen's mind worked differently. She immediately felt uneasy. She leaned closer to the window, pushing her curtain back just a little more, as if she were a detective gathering evidence. Karen had heard stories on the news about people hacking into networks, stealing personal information, and even running scams right from their own front yards. In her head, Marcus fit the picture perfectly. She didn't stop to think that he lived there, that it was his own porch, or that he might be doing something harmless. Instead, her imagination ran wild. What is he doing out there? She muttered to herself. Why all those wires? Why the laptop? This looks fishy. She tapped her fingers on the armrest of her chair, debating her next move. Karen prided herself on being the kind of person who acted quickly when she thought something wasn't right. She believed that if she didn't speak up, something terrible might happen. It never crossed her mind that her instincts could be wrong, or that she might be judging someone unfairly. Minutes passed, and Marcus continued working, adjusting cables, checking his screen, sipping his coffee. Each small action made Karen more suspicious. When he leaned over to tighten a wire, she imagined he was breaking into something. When he typed commands on his laptop, she was convinced he was accessing private data. The more she watched, the more convinced she became that she had caught someone in the act. Karen's heart raced as she picked up her phone. She paced the living room for a moment, trying to decide if she should really call, but her fear drowned out any hesitation. She remembered neighborhood gossip about robberies in nearby towns, though they had nothing to do with Wi-Fi or computers. She also remembered how she had once complained about loud music from another neighbor and felt proud when the police showed up. In her mind, she was doing her community a service. She dialed the numbers, 911, without another thought. When the operator answered, Karen's voice shook with urgency. She described Marcus as a suspicious black man, messing with wires and computers on a porch. She exaggerated his actions, saying he looked like he was hacking into something, and that he might be trying to break into people's networks. Her words painted Marcus as a dangerous figure, not the calm, focused man he truly was. As she spoke, her eyes never left the window. She watched him with growing intensity, almost hoping to see something that would confirm her story. The operator asked for more details, and Karen provided them with confidence, as though she were giving a professional report. Within minutes, the call was logged, and officers were dispatched. Karen felt a wave of satisfaction, believing she had prevented a crime before it even happened. She set her phone down, took a deep breath, and peeked once more through her window blinds. She muttered softly, "Let's see what you're really up to." What Karen didn't realize was that her fears and assumptions had just set in motion a chain of events that would spiral far beyond her control. She thought of herself as a protector of the neighborhood, someone others would thank later. But instead of protecting anyone, she was about to expose her own prejudice, her quickness to judge, and her readiness to assume the worst about someone based only on how they looked and what they were doing. Marcus, still on his porch, had no clue that eyes were on him. He was smiling, adjusting his router, and testing the new signal strength. To him, it was just a peaceful morning of productivity. But inside the house across the street, Karen's imagination had turned his routine into a crime scene. And with the police already on their way, Marcus's ordinary morning was about to become anything but ordinary. Karen's hands trembled slightly as she held her phone. She had already convinced herself that what she was seeing on Marcus's porch was a serious threat. Her heart beat faster with every passing second, and though nothing dangerous was actually happening, in her mind the danger was real. She felt like she was the only one who noticed, the only one who cared enough to stop it. That thought gave her both courage and justification to do what she was about to do. The phone rang once, then a calm voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? Karen didn't hesitate. Yes, hello, this is urgent. There's a suspicious man outside messing with wires and some kind of computer equipment. I think he's trying to hack into Wi-Fi systems or maybe even break into someone's house. Her voice carried a mixture of fear and certainty, though she had no actual proof. She added more details, each word pushing Marcus deeper into suspicion. He's sitting on the porch with all these wires, looking very suspicious, typing quickly on his laptop. I don't feel safe, and I don't think the neighborhood is safe either. The operator, trained to stay calm and gather information, asked, "Ma'am, can you describe the man to me? What does he look like?" Karen glanced again through her window blinds, her eyes narrowing. He's a black man, medium build, probably in his 30s. He's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, but he doesn't look like he belongs here. Please send someone quickly. He's definitely up to something. Her words were sharp, and though she spoke with conviction, they were built on assumption, not fact. Marcus wasn't a stranger. He was her neighbor. He did belong there. But in Karen's mind, his skin color, his laptop, and the wires at his feet told a different story, one shaped by fear and prejudice. The dispatcher continued to ask questions, making sure to note down everything Karen said. Is he on private property? Do you know if he lives at that house? Karen's hesitation lasted only a second before she replied firmly, I don't think he lives there. I've never seen him doing this before. It doesn't look right at all. She had seen Marcus many times before, but she brushed that aside. Admitting she knew he lived there would weaken her argument, and right now she wanted the police to arrive quickly. The dispatcher reassured her. Officers are on their way, ma'am. Please stay inside your home and do not approach the individual. Karen ended the call, a wave of relief washing over her. To her, she had done the right thing. She had acted. She believed the police would arrive, confirm her suspicions, and thank her for her vigilance. She pictured herself as a hero who kept the neighborhood safe. Meanwhile, outside, Marcus was completely unaware of what had just happened. He was lost in his own world, adjusting the settings on his router, testing the signal, and jotting down notes in a small notebook. The Wi-Fi bars on his laptop were improving, and he felt pleased with himself. He had no idea that a false narrative was already spreading, one that painted him as a criminal instead of a homeowner taking care of his own property. Back in her house, Karen couldn't sit still. She kept pacing, peeking out the window every few seconds. She expected Marcus to suddenly run or to reveal some illegal gadget, or to make her fears come true. But all he did was sip his coffee and type on his laptop. That should have calmed her, but instead it made her more anxious. In her mind, the calmness only meant he was clever, covering up whatever wrong thing he was doing. She rehearsed what she would say if the police questioned her. She told herself she was simply being a good neighbor, looking out for the community. But deep down, a part of her knew she had jumped to conclusions too quickly. Still, she pushed that thought away. Better safe than sorry, she muttered. Minutes ticked by. The neighborhood stayed peaceful. Dogs barked in the distance, children played, and cars passed by slowly. To everyone else, it was just another Saturday morning. But Karen's heart raced every time she thought about the police cars that would soon arrive. She imagined the flashing lights, the officers stepping out, and Marcus being confronted. She imagined them uncovering something illegal, proving she had been right all along. That picture comforted her. It was the ending she wanted, the one that would make her feel justified. But reality was about to be very different. At that very moment, 2 police cruisers were already driving down the road, responding to her call. The officers inside didn't know the full truth yet. They only had Karen's version of events. They believed they were approaching a suspicious situation, possibly involving illegal activity. Their minds were already alert, prepared for confrontation. Karen spotted the police cars before Marcus did. Her heart leapt and she whispered under her breath, "Finally, now we'll see." She quickly stepped back from the window, not wanting to be seen as the caller, though she planned to watch everything unfold from behind her curtains. Marcus, still typing calmly, hadn't noticed the cruisers slowing near his house. He was smiling, satisfied with his progress. For him, it was still just an ordinary morning. For Karen, it was the moment she had been waiting for. And for the police, it was the beginning of a situation that was about to take a very unexpected turn. The sound of tires crunching slowly over the pavement broke the calm of the street. 2 police cruisers rolled into the neighborhood, their black and white paint gleaming in the sun. Their lights weren't flashing yet, but the presence of law enforcement was impossible to ignore. The few neighbors outside looked up curiously, wondering what was going on. Marcus, still sitting on his porch, was too focused on the blinking lights of his router to notice right away. He had just tightened the last cable and refreshed the settings on his laptop. When he finally lifted his head, he saw the two cars stop right in front of his house. Confusion spread across his face. He hadn't called for help. He hadn't done anything wrong. So why were they there? Inside her house, Karen's heart raced with excitement. From her window, she watched the officers step out of their vehicles. They moved with purpose, hands near their belts, scanning the porch where Marcus sat. Karen felt a wave of pride, believing she had prevented a crime. She whispered to herself, "I knew it. I knew something was wrong." The first officer, tall and broad-shouldered, approached with caution. "Sir," he called out, his tone firm but professional. "Can you step away from the equipment, please?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Excuse me?" he asked, setting his coffee mug down. "Step away from the wires and the laptop," the officer repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were ready for any sudden move. Marcus raised his hand slightly, palms open to show he wasn't a threat. Okay, he said calmly, standing up. "But what's going on? This is my house. I live here." By now, a few neighbors had gathered on the sidewalks, watching the scene unfold like an unexpected show. Whispers passed between them and phones quietly recorded from across the street. Some knew Marcus well and looked confused. Others were too curious to stay silent. The second officer, shorter and younger, walked up to Marcus's porch steps. "We got a report about suspicious activity," he said. "We need to know what you're doing here with this equipment." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He realized quickly that someone must have misunderstood what he was doing. He glanced at the laptop, then back at the officers. "I'm fixing my Wi-Fi," he explained. "It's been giving me trouble, so I'm modifying the setup. I work in IT. This is my job. Nothing suspicious about it." The taller officer exchanged a glance with his partner, then asked, "Do you have proof that you live here?" Marcus nodded quickly, moving slowly toward the door. "Yes, I can get my ID, my bills, whatever you need. This is my home. I'm not trespassing." Karen, still hidden behind her curtain, leaned forward eagerly. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment her call would be validated. In her mind, Marcus's calm explanations were just clever excuses. She thought, they're not going to fall for that. But the neighbors watching outside weren't as convinced. One of them, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, spoke up loudly. "He lives there." "That's Marcus. He's been my neighbor for years." Another nodded in agreement. "Yeah, he's just the tech guy. He's always fixing stuff." The officers paused. They weren't expecting the crowd to defend him so quickly. The younger officer turned back to Marcus, softening his tone slightly. "Sir, if you could just show us some identification, we can clear this up." Marcus sighed, trying to remain calm even as frustration bubbled inside him. He went into his house, returned with his driver's license and a utility bill with his name and address on it, and handed them over. The officers studied the documents carefully. Meanwhile, the taller officer walked over to the equipment. He crouched down, inspecting the router, wires, and tools scattered neatly on the porch. It all looked perfectly normal. Nothing illegal, nothing suspicious, just the setup of someone improving his internet connection. Karen's excitement began to fade as she noticed the officer's body language change. They were no longer tense. They were no longer treating Marcus like a criminal. Instead, they looked almost apologetic. She gripped the curtain tighter, her mouth pressing into a thin line. The taller officer stood up and handed Marcus back his ID. "Everything checks out," he admitted. "Looks like you're telling the truth. You're just fixing your Wi-Fi." Marcus gave a half smile, though there was sadness in his eyes. "That's what I've been saying. But somebody thought I was suspicious enough to call the police on me." His voice carried a quiet weight, one that made the neighbors listening grow uncomfortable. The younger officer shifted awkwardly. "We apologize for the inconvenience. We have to respond to calls like these. But it seems this was a misunderstanding." Marcus nodded slowly, trying to hide his frustration. "I understand. You're doing your job. But maybe people should think twice before assuming the worst about someone." Those words, though calm, struck deeply. The neighbors murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads at the unnecessary drama. Marcus returned to his porch, gathering his tools and laptop, determined to finish his project even after the interruption. But the story was far from over. Because as the officers wrapped up, They decided to check something else, something that would soon flip the entire situation upside down. And from her window, Karen felt her stomach twist. For the first time that morning, she began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Marcus sat back down on his porch steps. His tools still spread around him, but the satisfaction he had felt earlier was gone. The joy of fixing his Wi-Fi had been replaced by a heavy feeling in his chest. He tried to stay calm, but inside he couldn't shake the thought. Someone really saw me working at my own home and thought I was a criminal. The officers stood nearby, speaking softly to one another. Their tones had shifted. No longer sharp, no longer filled with suspicion. They were professional, almost embarrassed. The taller officer cleared his throat and turned to Marcus. "Sir, we need to be honest with you. We received a call about suspicious activity. The caller specifically described you and said you didn't belong here." Marcus raised his eyebrows, letting out a short laugh that wasn't filled with humor. "Didn't belong here? I've lived here for years, paid every bill on time, took care of this house with my own hands, and yet, one look at me working on my Wi-Fi makes someone think I don't belong?" His words carried weight, and the neighbors who had gathered grew quieter. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, realizing what he meant. The younger officer sighed, almost as if he wanted to say more but couldn't. "We just have to respond when people call. But from what we see, you're not doing anything wrong. Everything here checks out." Marcus nodded, but the sting remained. He wanted to ask, "Why does my skin color make me suspicious? Why do my own tools make me a suspect?" But instead, he kept his emotions contained. He knew that raising his voice or showing anger might only make things worse. One of the neighbors, Mr. Johnson, stepped closer and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is nonsense. We all know Marcus. He's a good man. He helps people with their internet and computers all the time. Whoever called this in should be ashamed." Karen, still hidden behind her curtain, clenched her jaw. Her face grew hot as the realization crept in. People were defending Marcus, not her. She had expected nods of agreement, validation for her fears. Instead, the truth was unraveling in front of her, and it didn't match the story she had built in her head. The officers decided to make things crystal clear. The taller one crouched again by Marcus's equipment, checking the router and the wires. "This is standard," he said out loud, as though explaining it to everyone watching. "These are normal tools for someone setting up or upgrading their Wi-Fi system. Nothing dangerous, nothing illegal." Marcus picked up his coffee mug and took a slow sip, his eyes fixed on the officer. "Exactly. That's all I was doing. But it didn't matter, did it? Because someone looked out their window and saw a black man with a laptop and wires, and suddenly I'm the problem." His voice was calm, but each word was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. The neighbors looked at one another, some nodding in agreement. A few even muttered words like unfair and ridiculous. The younger officer shifted, uncomfortable but honest. "You're right, sir. The call we got wasn't based on facts. It was based on someone's assumptions." Karen's stomach dropped. For the first time, her certainty cracked. She could feel her neighbor's judgment without even stepping outside. She imagined the whispers, the pointing fingers, the way they would look at her if they knew she was the one who had called. She pressed her forehead to the glass, wishing she could rewind time, wishing she had just minded her own business. Marcus, still seated calmly, looked around at the crowd. "I want you all to think about this," he said, his voice steady. "If I can't sit on my own porch and fix my own Wi-Fi without the police being called on me, what does that say? Not about me, but about the person who made that call." The truth was out now. Everyone understood that Marcus hadn't done anything suspicious. The emergency Karen had imagined was nothing more than a man improving his internet connection. What shocked people wasn't just that the call had been unnecessary. It was the realization of what the call revealed. Fear, prejudice, and quick judgment wrapped together. The taller officer finally straightened up. He gave Marcus a respectful nod. "You're free to continue what you were doing. Sorry for the interruption." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't feel like smiling. "Apology accepted," he said quietly. "But I hope whoever made that call learned something from this." The neighbors lingered, talking among themselves, glancing around as if trying to figure out who had dialed 911. Karen shrank further behind her curtain, her heart pounding. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. People would ask questions, and when the truth came out, the shame would fall squarely on her. For Marcus, the truth had been proven. He wasn't the criminal. He wasn't the suspicious figure. He was the victim of someone else's assumptions. The officers had uncovered nothing illegal, but in doing so, they had uncovered something far more revealing. The bias that still lived in their neighborhood, hidden behind polite smiles and closed windows. What had begun as a simple Wi-Fi project had turned into a public lesson about prejudice. And though Marcus tried to go back to his work, he knew that things would never quite feel the same. The morning had started ordinary, but the truth that had unfolded made it unforgettable. Karen's living room felt smaller by the second. The walls seemed to close in as she stood frozen behind her curtain, clutching the fabric so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had expected validation, applause even, for being the neighborhood's watchful protector. But instead she could hear the murmurs outside, the shift in the crowd's mood, the way people were siding with Marcus. The word misunderstanding had already spread among the neighbors, and with it came questions. Who called the police? Why would someone think Marcus was suspicious? Karen's stomach twisted as she realized those questions had only one answer. Her. Outside, Marcus remained calm, but the neighborhood was buzzing. Mrs. Rodriguez crossed her arms, shaking her head with visible irritation. "This isn't right," she said to the younger officer. "We all know Marcus. Whoever called you wasted your time." The officer nodded politely but didn't reveal the caller's identity. Still, suspicion drifted through the air like smoke. Neighbors whispered to one another, their eyes subtly scanning the houses, searching for the source of the false alarm. Karen tried to steady her breathing, telling herself she could deny it if anyone asked. She rehearsed excuses in her head. Maybe I can say I didn't see clearly. Maybe I can say I thought it was someone else's house. Maybe I can act innocent. She repeated these thoughts like a shield against the guilt rising inside her. But guilt has a way of showing itself, even when someone tries to bury it. Just as Karen turned away from the window, she heard her name, loud, clear, from outside. Karen probably called, Mr. Johnson muttered, not even trying to be discreet. She's always watching everyone. She's always the first to complain about something. The word stung like a slap. Karen's face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to scream that it wasn't true, but deep down she knew she couldn't. Because it was true. Every neighbor had seen her peeking through windows, heard her endless complaints about dogs barking, lawns not trimmed, cars parked the wrong way. She had spent years building that reputation. Now it betrayed her. Marcus, still holding his laptop, looked across the street toward Karen's house. He didn't say her name, but his gaze lingered on her drawn curtain, and everyone else followed his eyes. The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone seemed to understand without words who had made the call. Karen felt her legs go weak. She sank onto her couch, heart pounding. She thought about staying inside until everyone went home, but she also feared that her silence would only confirm their suspicions. After several minutes of agonizing indecision, she finally stood, smoothed her shirt, and stepped outside. The moment she opened her door, all eyes turned to her. The street seemed to hold its breath. She forced a tight smile, trying to appear casual. "What's going on out here?" she asked, her voice falsely sweet. Mrs. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Don't act like you don't know," she said sharply. "The police just came here for no reason." "You called, didn't you?" Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She wanted to deny it, but her neighbor's piercing stares pinned her down. Every second of silence was louder than a confession. Finally, she stammered, I thought something suspicious was happening. I didn't know it was Marcus. I was just worried." Marcus stood tall, his calm composure unshaken. "Worried about what?" he asked evenly. "That a man fixing his own Wi-Fi is a threat? That me sitting on my porch is dangerous? If you weren't sure, you could have just asked me. Instead, you called the police." The crowd murmured in agreement, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. Karen's cheeks burned red, her excuse collapsing under the truth. Some neighbors shook their heads, others glared at her with open disappointment. Mr. Johnson muttered, "Always quick to judge. Always stirring trouble." Karen felt the shame rise like a wave, threatening to drown her. She crossed her arms defensively, trying to find some way to save face. "I was only trying to protect the neighborhood," she insisted weakly. But her words rang hollow. Everyone knew the truth now. Her actions hadn't been about protecting anyone. They had been about suspicion, prejudice, and assumptions. The taller officer spoke gently but firmly. "Ma'am, false reports waste resources and put innocent people in danger. You need to be more careful in the future." Karen swallowed hard, nodding quickly, though her pride screamed inside her. The idea of being scolded in front of her neighbors, of being exposed as the one who had overreacted, felt unbearable. Marcus looked at her, his eyes steady. He didn't shout. He didn't insult her. Instead, his silence carried more power than anger could. It was the silence of someone who had been wronged but chose dignity over revenge. Karen wished in that moment that the ground would open up and swallow her whole. Every neighbor's eyes were on her, and not one of them held sympathy. Her attempt to appear as the vigilant hero had backfired, and now she stood exposed, as the neighbor who judged too quickly, the one who called the police on a man for simply existing on his own porch. The whispers grew, spreading faster than wildfire. Karen called 911 on Marcus. She thought he was a criminal. She wasted everyone's time, and Karen knew those whispers would not fade easily. They would linger in the neighborhood like a stain she couldn't wash away. The truth had been revealed. And for the first time in years, Karen felt what it was like to be on the wrong side of the story. The tension in the neighborhood was heavy, like a storm cloud that refused to move on. Marcus had already been cleared of suspicion, and Karen had been exposed as the caller who brought the police there. But the officers weren't finished yet. The taller officer, still crouched near Marcus's porch, adjusted his stance and looked thoughtfully at the equipment. "Everything checks out here," he said, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "But since we received a report, we have to do a standard check around the area, just to be thorough." Marcus nodded, though his frustration was still visible. "Do what you need to do. I've got nothing to hide." The younger officer walked slowly down the sidewalk, scanning the nearby houses. His eyes lingered on Karen's property. Something had caught his attention. Mounted on the side of her house near the gutter was a small device with blinking lights. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary signal booster. But the officer knew better. He had seen similar devices before. "Hey," he called to his partner, pointing toward Karen's home. "Take a look at that." The taller officer squinted, then nodded. "That's not standard equipment." Karen froze on her porch. She had stepped out earlier, trying to defend her actions, but now she felt all the air leave her lungs. Her throat tightened as the officers crossed the street toward her house. "What's this, ma'am?" the younger officer asked, gesturing to the device. Karen forced a shaky smile. "Oh, just something I use to help with my internet signal. Nothing unusual." But the officer's sharp eyes didn't miss the details. "That's not a normal Wi-Fi booster. This model is often used for piggybacking onto other networks. In other words, it can be used to steal bandwidth from nearby homes." The crowd gasped, murmurs rising instantly. Neighbors exchanged shocked looks, whispering to one another. All this time, Karen had been accusing Marcus of suspicious behavior, but it turned out she was the one with questionable equipment attached to her house. Marcus folded his arms across his chest, his expression calm but pointed. "So let me get this straight. She called the police on me, while she's the one actually tampering with internet connections?" The taller officer turned to Karen, his voice firm. "Ma'am, can you explain where you got this device? And why you didn't mention it earlier when you accused someone else of suspicious activity?" Karen's mouth went dry. She stammered, I didn't know. I just bought it online. I thought it was for better Wi-Fi coverage. I didn't know it could be used like that." But her neighbors weren't buying it. Mrs. Rodriguez crossed her arms tightly. "So you call the cops on Marcus for fixing his own Wi-Fi while you've been using something shady on your house?" "Unbelievable." Another neighbor chimed in. "That explains why my internet's been slow lately. Maybe she's been stealing from us this whole time." The whispers grew louder, harsher. Karen's face turned crimson as she realized the tide had turned completely against her. Just hours ago, she had felt powerful, in control, the guardian of her street. Now she stood cornered, exposed, her credibility shattered. The officers examined the device closely, noting the wiring that led into Karen's home. The younger one shook his head. "This isn't looking good. We'll have to file a report on this." Karen's knees wobbled. She felt the ground slipping beneath her, the shame crushing her. "It's just a mistake," she pleaded. "I didn't mean any harm. I swear." Marcus looked at her steadily, his voice calm but strong. "You had no problem believing the worst about me. No hesitation calling the police, no hesitation wasting their time." But now that you're caught, suddenly it's a mistake? Funny how that works. The crowd nodded, some openly glaring at Karen. The balance of judgment had shifted completely. No longer was Marcus under suspicion. It was Karen who stood accused, not only of prejudice but of dishonesty. The taller officer finally spoke, his tone controlled. "Ma'am, we'll need to follow up on this. For now, you'll be asked to disconnect this device and provide proof of purchase. If we find evidence of unauthorized use, there could be consequences." Karen's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation. She had wanted Marcus to be exposed, but instead, she was the one standing in the spotlight, stripped of her authority and her reputation. Marcus turned back to his equipment, picking up his tools calmly. "I guess the real discovery today wasn't about me at all," he said quietly, his words carrying across the street. "It was about who people really are when they think no one's watching." The neighbors nodded in agreement, their respect for Marcus growing even stronger. In contrast, Karen's once familiar presence in the neighborhood now carried a shadow. She wasn't the protector she claimed to be. She was the neighbor who judged unfairly, the one who wasted police resources, the one hiding her own questionable actions behind closed curtains. The truth had been uncovered, and it shocked everyone, not because Marcus had done anything wrong, but because the very person who accused him had secrets of her own. And as the officers made notes and the crowd slowly dispersed, Karen felt a loneliness she had never known before. The stares of her neighbors followed her, heavy with disappointment. The truth had been revealed, and it was far worse than anything she had ever imagined. The police cars eventually drove away, their presence fading into the distance, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the neighborhood like a heavy fog. The quiet street, once filled with curiosity and whispers, now carried an unspoken tension. People returned to their homes, but they carried the story with them. It was the kind of event that wouldn't simply disappear. It would be retold, reshaped, and remembered. Marcus sat back on his porch, his tools neatly gathered beside him. He looked tired, not from the work of fixing his Wi-Fi, but from the emotional strain of what had unfolded. What should have been a simple Saturday project had turned into a public spectacle. He stared at his laptop screen, the Wi-Fi bars now strong and steady, but the satisfaction was gone. Inside, he thought about the lesson the day had given him. Not a lesson he needed, but one the world had forced upon him yet again. He had done nothing wrong, yet he had been judged, questioned, and treated like a suspect because of someone else's fear and prejudice. And though the truth had come out, the sting of the experience would stay with him. Still, Marcus was not a man who held on to bitterness. He believed in dignity and showing strength without anger. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that the way he handled the situation would echo longer than the situation itself. By staying calm, by speaking truth without raising his voice, he had shown not only who he was, but also who his accuser really was. Across the street, Karen sat inside her home, the blinds drawn tightly shut. Her hands shook as she replayed the day's events in her mind over and over. At first, she had felt justified. She had believed she was protecting her neighborhood. But now she was the one people whispered about. She was the one exposed. Her phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor, a simple line that made her heart sink. "We need to talk about what you did today." Another message followed, this time harsher. "That was wrong, Karen, really wrong." Karen dropped the phone onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. She had lived in that neighborhood for years, priding herself on knowing everything that happened on the street. But now her watchful eyes had turned against her. Instead of respect, she had earned distrust. Instead of admiration, she had earned shame. The next morning, when she stepped outside to collect her newspaper, the silence was louder than words. Neighbors who once greeted her with polite nods now turned away. Some whispered to each other as she passed, their eyes sharp with judgment. Children who used to wave at her avoided her yard. Karen felt invisible and exposed all at once. For Marcus, however, the aftermath was different. Neighbors came by over the following days, some offering apologies on behalf of the community, others offering support. "We're sorry you had to go through that," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly, handing him a plate of homemade cookies. "You didn't deserve it." Marcus accepted the gestures kindly, though he knew apologies couldn't erase what had happened. What mattered was that people had seen the truth with their own eyes. They had witnessed prejudice in action, and they had watched it crumble under the weight of reality. Word spread beyond the neighborhood. Someone's phone recording of the incident, posted online, went viral. People across the city and eventually across the country saw the video. They saw a man calmly defending himself against baseless accusations. They saw neighbors stepping up to speak truth. And they saw a woman exposed not just for her false call, but for the deeper prejudice behind it. The comments poured in. Outrage, support for Marcus, disappointment in Karen's actions. The story became a symbol, another reminder of the dangers of assumptions and the power of bias. For Marcus, it was uncomfortable to suddenly become the center of attention. But he reminded himself that maybe his story could help prevent the next one. Maybe, just maybe, someone watching would think twice before making the same mistake. As for Karen, her world grew smaller. The shame followed her wherever she went, at the grocery store, at church, even walking her dog. Whispers trailed her, and she could feel the judgment in every glance. She wanted to defend herself, to say she had only been trying to help, but she knew the truth. She hadn't acted out of concern for safety. She had acted out of fear, out of prejudice, and now the world knew it. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood slowly returned to its rhythm. Children played, dogs barked, cars came and went. But things were different. People were more careful, more thoughtful, more aware of how quickly assumptions could spiral out of control. And every time Marcus sat on his porch with his laptop, no one dared to question him again. In the end, the biggest discovery of that day wasn't the illegal device attached to Karen's house. It wasn't even the viral story that spread online. The real discovery was about people, about how easily fear could blind someone to the truth, and how powerful it was when dignity and truth stood against prejudice. Marcus had started his morning with nothing more in mind than fixing his Wi-Fi. He ended it by teaching his neighborhood and the world a lesson they would never forget. And as the sun set on that quiet street, one thing was certain: the story of Karen's call would live on. Not as a tale of suspicion, but as a lesson in justice, humility, and the strength of staying true to oneself.